Give me the signal, James. Welcome to the Human Factor, the LinkedIn Live of Inc. and Fast Company. I'm Schurenberg, the CEO of Inc. and Fast Company. Our guest today is Ben Lerer, the founding CEO of Group 9 Media, a digital media holding company with an extraordinary collection of top media brands. Men's lifestyle site, Thrillist, which he founded. The news site, Now This, the animal lover site, The Dodo, founded by his sister Izzy, science and research site, Seeker, and the women's lifestyle site, Pop Sugar. Collectively, according to its internal numbers, Group 9 brands account for 7 billion mobile video views per month, putting it at number one collectively in mobile video and one way or another in the pocket of 70% of millennials and Gen Zers. Ben's also the co-founder and managing director of Lerer Hippo Ventures, along with his father, Ken. Lerer Hippo invests in early-stage tech companies and has a number of notable exits, including Casper, which recently IPO'd, and Giphy and CrowdTangle, sold to Facebook, Payable to Stripe, just to name a few of those exits. Now, Ben, with Group Hippo and with Group 9 and Lerer Hippo, you're really at the heart of the disruption of the media landscape, and with Group 9 acquisition SPAC you filed recently, you're aiming to have the wherewithal to bankroll even more. You are a fascinating guy, and it's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. Very appreciate it.
Now, there's a lot to talk about with you about the future of media and technology, but I'd like to start by talking about the past, because I think origin stories for entrepreneurs are so interesting and so formative. So let me take you back to the founding of Thrillist. What was the opportunity that you saw? What was the vision that you had? And what gave you the confidence to follow through on that?
Yeah, cool. I haven't told this story in a long time. So I started Thrillist almost 15 years ago, which is depressing. And really, I think like many businesses, I built something for me and my friends. And so I was, just out of college, living in New York City, thought of myself as somebody, sort of social butterfly, little moron running around town, and sort of realized that my mother and I were supposed to read the same city guide, and felt like that didn't make sense, and started writing emails to friends about places that I discovered that I thought were fun and interesting, and got a little following. Amazingly, was not familiar with Daily Candy when we started Thrillist. Very shortly thereafter, we became aware of Daily Candy and realized that our idea was not particularly novel, aside from the fact that we were catering to a different demographic. And then studied what Daily Candy had built and really modeled ourselves after them. In fact, went to the folks who had funded them and raised money from that group, which was headed by Bob Pittman. And and then I think like any other startup, we put one foot in front of the other and built our audience and built our influence, and then built an advertising business on the back of it. And it was a different universe at that point. I mean, this is pre-iPhone, this is pre-social media. And that's how we got started. And I had sort of grown up in a house where my father had been an entrepreneur and had been building a business really throughout my whole childhood that he sold, I guess, when I was in, high school or middle school or whatever. But so the idea of starting something didn't feel foreign to me. And I had great support from my parents who, I guess encouraged it, very luckily. And, good timing and a lot of hard work was the right formula at that point.
It is really interesting about your parents and the influence on entrepreneurship. But in our research of Inc. 5000 honorees, something like 45% were the children of entrepreneurs. Really? And entrepreneurs make up like 2% of the population. So there's something about like seeing how it works and even just kind of knowing it's an option that
I think it just sort of gives you permission to not follow. I mean, I remember when I was graduating from college and so many of my friends were going into, traditional paths, whether that meant, working on Wall Street or wanting to go to business school or law school or, whatever sort of field people matriculate to. And I just didn't ever think about any of that. It never crossed my mind that I would go and try to work in finance or I went and right out of school, I worked in hospitality. Actually, I worked for a small boutique hotel group, and And again, I think that Thrillist was sort of a grew out of that, which was I was interested in hospitality, I was interested in food, I was interested in nightlife and things that ultimately became the categories that Thrillist covered from an editorial perspective.
Do you think that someone could build an audience the way you did at Thrillist and the way Daily Candy did these days? Things have changed so much.
Interestingly, things have changed, but history repeats itself. And I think that, we sort of built Thrillist at a time where email newsletters were emerging and where it was, we sort of rode the wave or a wave around that becoming a popular format for people to consume content in. It became wildly oversaturated and, folks moved on to other models. I think now you see a renaissance happening in and around email newsletters with Substack and with, companies like Axios, who are creating really, must read labors of love. The Scam, I think there's plenty of examples of companies who have built really interesting businesses on the back of email. Again, they have different tools to build those user bases. And so the difference 15 years ago was I didn't have Facebook, I didn't have social media to go and spread the word that we were creating an email. So the way that our email grew was, viral media was people forwarding your email or talking about it at, the proverbial water cooler. I think today there's a bunch of different tools to grow. And so you see successful email newsletters today grow so much faster than we were able to grow at Thrillist in the early days. And you also see a bunch of folks who are investing into the newsletter category, being focused on, our focus at Thrillist in the early days was really about scale. We wanted tons and tons of readers. I think now you see folks going and building much more, sort of more vertically oriented and building paid products. Obviously, publications like The Information, in sort of more B2B categories. And I think that's a really interesting model. And I think if we were relaunching Thrillist today, we would want to go and build an email again, but we would probably use a bunch of different tactics.
That's really interesting. We'll come back to that, but I thought while we're on the subject of origin stories, we might as well talk about Lerer Hippo too. What was the vision there? Why early stage? And let's just talk about that. What was the vision?
So Lerer Hippo was I actually really like the origin story here. So it was my dad, who had been living and working in New York for 30 years when I graduated from college, and I sort of got the itch and wanted to go start a company and a technology company at Thrillist, and I sort of got into what was at that point a pretty nascent New York startup ecosystem. And I remember that as the ecosystem just started to heat up a little bit, my dad remarked to me one day that he thought it was interesting that my friends wanted to go and work at or start like technology companies. And basically he said, it's interesting. I've been working here for a long time. Smart kids who graduate from top colleges didn't want to be entrepreneurs ever. They wanted to go and they wanted to get jobs on Wall Street and do all this other crap. And he said, it's really interesting. Something's happening right now that I don't know how to put a finger on. And I remember Foursquare raised like their Series A, and it was like a big moment in New York. And he sent me a note and he said, oh man, look at this company. This is so cool. I wish that we had like invested in this company. And I said, oh, I guess we could have. I know these guys. And he said, wow, but what? Like, why didn't you think of that? I'm like, why would I think of investing at? What are you talking about? I'm doing my job. Like, leave me alone. And he said, something's happening here. We should try to invest in some of these companies. And I said, you have a full-time job. I have a full-time job. And by the way, he was working in a startup at that point too. He had co-founded the Huffington Post with Ariana. And so he was also working in digital media. And I sort of said, we both have jobs. This is not a great idea. And he said, well, maybe we'll raise a fund. And if we raise a fund, then we can hire somebody to help us. And so we can actually build this into a little thing. So we raised a small fund from friends and family. And the idea was he was able to raise the money and I had the deal flow. And we raised a little $8.5 million fund I guess it was 2010. And that was the sort of impetus for that was the starting point. And since we're now on our 7th seed fund, and we have 3 what we call select funds, but that are sort of later stage growth funds. And it was really all built on that sort of early idea that he had, and we got to ride what happened in New York. And so his insight was right that something special was happening in New York specifically. And so that first vintage of companies that we invested in were companies like Warby Parker and BuzzFeed, and these great, not just iconic companies, but iconic consumer companies. And, as is the way of the world, like our brand in some way got associated with these fantastic consumer brands. And when people said, I want to build the Warby Parker of X, they thought to call the investors who had invested in Warby Parker. And so, timing is everything. And we got lucky early and surrounded ourselves and made some good bets. And then we've just been able to be a part of a really exciting growing ecosystem in New York ever since.
Yeah, that is a great story. You're right. How much is New York part of the identity of the company?
Yeah, I think it's a big part of the fund for a variety of reasons. I mean, one portion of that is just the fact that the majority of the deals that we do are in New York, and we really pride ourselves on having a great network in New York, and have funded the last decade of this ecosystem, and been, if nothing else, the most active investor in the ecosystem, and funded the most companies. And so I think it's a big part of the identity of the fund. And, I grew up in New York, and my family's from New York, and, we feel like obviously the fund is based there. But again, and I think we're just also big believers in New York. Sort of when New York sets its mind to something, it succeeds at it. And it did so about 10 years ago in terms of making New York a technology hub. And I think Mayor Bloomberg played a role in that. And New York became a place that really sort of stood for, an alternative to Silicon Valley. And then obviously New York is so deep in so many areas, from fashion to fintech to everything in between, that there were just so many industries that New York was going to have amazing talent in, that it's just been a really fertile ground for finding great companies and great entrepreneurs.
Well, speaking of talent, you've said many times that you invest in the team rather than the idea or a company or the product. Why is that?
Well, I think every early stage investor says that, partially because you often don't have a product to sort of make a determination based upon. But the reality is, I mean, when you're coming in as among the first investors, whether you're the actual first money or the first institutional money, there's generally less data. Obviously, in most cases there is a product, and there is an idea, and there is a thesis. In some cases, there's a well-developed product and thesis. It depends on the industry and the individual. But the one thing that there always is the talent around the table and the folks who are building the company. And I think that generally speaking, if you look at the investors that have done well at the early stage, it's a product of people picking. I mean, it's knowing who to back. And I know it sounds sort of cliche and silly, but in some ways it's sort of, I think there are elements of it like dating, where you sort of meet somebody and you feel compelled, you lean in, you think that there's something about them that's interesting. Obviously there's a lot of work that has to go into validating the vision that they have, and if there's a product and more to look at to understand what they're building. But we do a lot of work around the people. But again, it's an imperfect science, because the reality is we meet great people who are doing things that we don't think are good ideas, and we sometimes pass on people who we think are great. And it's not an irregular occurrence that I meet somebody and I say, literally, if you were doing anything else, I would invest in you, but please don't do this, because I really don't like this. And sometimes we're right about that call, and sometimes we're wrong about that call. But what we don't do is someone comes in with a great business, but we have real discomfort with the team, and say, well, we're going to make money, they're going to be successful, but boy, do we not trust them or like them or think that we can add value or vibe with them. Like, people can't be something that you bend on.
That's really interesting. It sounds like there's a lot of gut or, personal pattern recognition that you have to have a lot of faith in on your own part.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of gut and pattern recognition. I would say that in particular in the very earliest funds, before you have an established brand and sort of a network of founders who you've backed and an ecosystem that in some ways becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, where over time you have your best company, founders come back for a second time, or your best companies produce talent that goes out and launches their own companies. And so it's sort of become, you sort of have an ecosystem over time where the quality of deal flow that you see is higher and more proprietary. And so to some degree, it gets a little bit easier over time than it is in the early days when you don't have a brand and you're sort of hunting. But yeah, it is a highly, it is a feel-based business in the early stage, and a relationship-based business. And it's a sort of funny thing to be good at. But yeah.
Yeah. As you're evaluating these people, one of the things that a lot of VCs note is that there's often a distinction between the person who's a great startup leader and the person who's a great leader of a company that's grown to scale, or that is on the verge of scaling, and that there needs to be another person to come in and bring it to its next stage. The number of founding CEOs who stick around for a number of years are rare. You're one. And Neil and David over at Warby Parker are another kind of counterexample, but that's not the standard thing. Do you think that those are two different skill sets?
Well, I think they can be, but they're not. It's not mutually exclusive. For us, when we're investing in people, I think we're always imagining them as the CEO. So we don't invest in someone and say, we think they're great, we think probably they're not going to be able to scale past Series B, but we think they're good to start a company, and then they'll hire a CEO. We make a bet on a person, and the assumption is that sort of, we'll go down with the ship, so to speak. Like, our bet is on them, and we're not sort of activists in trying to push founders out if things aren't working. I'd prefer to lose my money, frankly, than to pretend that I should be the person going and sort of playing board member and rearranging the deck chairs. It's just not, it's not our business model, and it's not sort of philosophically how I think about this. But, and that may be because I'm a founder myself. But I would say that, we make a bet on somebody, and the hope and the assumption is that they're going to be able to grow with the business. And, in the vast majority of cases, for one reason or another, the company doesn't work out, things change, the company sells early, in fact, the person doesn't scale. Most of the time, you don't end up with a company going from zero to IPO with the same founder in place. I mean, that's just right. That's the reality of it. But we're never. That's not the math for us when we make the investment. We make an investment and a bet on somebody who we think has a vision and who's going to go build something great. Good.
Okay. As you mentioned, you had a reputation as you started out at Lerer Hippo as having a sixth sense for promising direct-to-consumer companies. In that space, do you still see a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs who are thinking about their potential if their vision is for a DTC company? Would you say that that's still a promising field?
Yeah, well, so there have been a bunch of iterations, I would say, of sort of the DTC model and the way that it is perceived by investors. And so, 10 years ago, it was greenfield. It was sort of, okay, what is any category that has a big that has a big existing traditional business. Oh, my 3-year-old is here to visit us. Hi, Roots. Oh, that's awesome. Can I talk to you right after this? Because I'm in the middle of a little work thing on camera. I love you. This is welcome to COVID.
I love it.
Um,
I'm sorry, what's her name?
Oh, Mookie.
Oh, fantastic. Mookie.
Yep, Mookie is here.
Yeah, all right.
So that's awesome, bud. I love you. Okay. I'm literally on camera with many people. Okay, sorry. This is literally every day, though. This happens in almost every meeting. Okay, so, well, I'm sorry, what was the question? I lost
the question had to do about the state of DTC and sort of how it's evolved.
So it started where everything was greenfield, right? Every industry is like, that has not been disrupted by the internet will be disrupted. And so you could go into any category. And the idea of wholesale distribution, of retail distribution was that was awful. That was low margin. You didn't control your customer. Everything was direct to consumer. And it felt like all these companies could grow forever. And a bunch of money poured into the space, and a bunch of companies had a lot of success, but many of them developed a really unhealthy reliance on direct response advertising on Facebook and Google. And then you saw a bunch of companies sort of tap out and get to, let's call it $100 million and then sort of run out of room. And I think then there was sort of a renaissance where people said, okay, well, it's changing, and actually it's about omni-channel, and we're going to build our own retail stores, and we're going to do our own, and we're going to do wholesale distribution. And I think that was a really logical next step. But we're also going to have D2C and that data and that connection to our audience, and understand that relationship differently than the traditional companies in our space that are exclusively sold through third parties. Take it another year or two forward, then you have to sort of evolve your strategy around, okay, but where does Amazon fit into all of this in any category? Now that they're moving to private label, what happens there? Then I think the rise of Shopify as sort of like the full commerce stack over the last few years, and then COVID hits. And I think on the back of COVID, there's a little bit of a, again, history repeats itself. I'm not saying that for a second time, but I guess that's how strongly I believe in this thesis, which is you now have a little bit of, oh, wait, all those other forms of distribution are important, but direct to consumer, we were on the right track there. Those direct relationships are that much more important. And I think now there's a next level of focus on supply chain as well. And so I think the first generation was, go into these sort of democratized supply chains. I think now there's more of a focus, and some of this came on the back of sort of Trump tariffs, and now on the back of COVID, I think folks are just saying, how do you have more and more control over your business at every step, from the product that you make to how you make it, to how you distribute it, to where you sell it, and how you engage with consumers. And I do think that omni-channel is the right strategy, broadly speaking, but you're seeing more excitement and sort of a turning back the clock right now as it relates to D2C specifically. Okay, good. All right, thanks.
It's a nice overview, Ben. Thanks. Your most recent investment was in Air. If I'm not
most recent.
A digital asset management company that puts images in particular on in the cloud. Is software as a service, that kind of company, is that a promising area? Kind of what's your outlook on that?
Yeah, so SaaS. So we invested in Air a few years ago. But I think they may have very recently announced their Series A financing, which may be sort of which we participated in. What I would say is, it's no secret that sort of VCs love software as a service. It's obviously a really compelling business model that has, really predictable revenue and generally very high margins depending on the category. Air is in an interesting space broadly in terms of, I sort of think it fits really nicely into a future of work thesis.
Mhm.
and obviously future of work. We're now living in the future of work, as is evidenced by Mookie coming in twice during our call here. The idea that companies are going to need to be able to manage every aspect of their business, in the cloud and remotely and collaboratively is, I think, a very broad theme that we and lots of other investors really believe in, and Air is a good example of a company sort of participating in that ecosystem that we really like.
Okay, good. Let's pivot to media, which is the industry in which I find myself and think about every day. Um, Kind of to start with the question that every media executive asks the other when they meet, which is, how are you handling the COVID crisis, and how has that been for your company?
Yeah. So, and I don't know that that's just a media question,
Well,
uh,
true.
but COVID has obviously changed the way that everybody is working, and that every company is operating. I think there's a bunch of different answers to sort of how we at Group 9 have generally dealt with COVID. Of course, there are sort of like the obvious business disruptions and advertising disruptions that happened earlier last year. I think the more interesting stuff to talk about really, though, is just the cultural ramifications inside a company for how you deal with managing a remote workforce and a group of people who are dealing with a lot, whether it's kids at home and being a caretaker and teacher and worker simultaneously, whether it's people who have family members who are sick or who are sick themselves. Put that all against the backdrop of what's happening in Washington. Like, this has just been, and everything that's happened around racial justice. This has been a hard year for everybody, right? And so how have we, I think the way that we've tried to deal with it has been by just being really communicative, really transparent. When things have been hard for the company or have been hard for, I think we've tried to be really sort of upfront and acknowledge those things. I think we've tried to, explain that this is uncharted territory for everybody, and really put a bunch of resources and pressure on, I should say, try to alleviate pressure around issues like mental health problems that are rampant right now at any company, and sort of another pandemic of loneliness that people are dealing with in isolation. I think this is really a time for you just have to be. It's hard, but you have to make companies really feel like just incredibly human, and with in particular with the lack of. I think people, traditionally have looked to the government for certain kinds of leadership that has been that has not existed over the past year, and so I think there is that much more of an onus on employers to really step up for their employees and be more than a paycheck, and be more than a distraction from some of the things in the outside world, but really to step up and be a support function and take care of people. And it's obviously hard because across so many industries, while you want to be stepping up and supporting people, there's also financial realities that come with some of the challenges that COVID creates. And so it's just been a mess, and it's been hard, and it's been but it's also been there are silver linings to it around this has been for me an amazing learning curve here. This has been a steep learning curve for me and for my executive team. I think that we have been able to hear our team differently than before, and prioritized not just surveying people, but really hearing how people are feeling and how people are hurting, and trying to be there. And I think generally speaking, I'm seeing this across our portfolio. I think this has been I think companies are stepping up, and I think some good companies are becoming great companies right now, And this is really forcing them to sort of evolve and grow up in ways that I don't know would happen without the sort of trauma that has existed this year.
Well, I love how you answered that question, Ben. It's, after all, the name of the LinkedIn Live is the human factor, and you've certainly underscored the human factor in response to that question. Let me ask you then, what have you personally done differently because of COVID that you wouldn't have done before in an ordinary year?
I mean, not put on pants.
Well, yeah. No, apart from that, and have invite your 3-year-old to the meetings, but as a leader,
yeah. Well, look, I think there's 100 different answers to this. One of them is around sort of triage from a time perspective. I think I realized that I spent a huge amount of time and energy meetings and updates and frankly micromanaging things, sort of almost keeping myself busy in certain situations where in sort of giving, COVID has forced us to give people more space. And what I found is that people have used that space as running room and have done really great things with it. And so I think that I probably have learned a lot about trusting my team and giving them a lot more just flexibility and leeway. 1, 2, I think I was much more traditional than I knew that I was around things like FaceTime, not FaceTime on your iPhone, FaceTime in the office. And you know, I had this belief that like your culture wasn't good if your office wasn't packed and hustling and bustling, and that it said something about your employees not being engaged if everybody didn't look like they were grinding. And I think it goes without saying that I've learned a big lesson around that this year, and we'll have a very different philosophy around, you know, hybrid work and flexible work going forward. I don't know exactly what it will look like, and as I don't think anybody does right now, but suffice it to say, you know, if COVID disappeared from the earth tomorrow, we would not go back to exactly the way that things were beforehand. And that's the case at most companies. That'll certainly be the case at any company that I have influence over. And I think those are sort of, you know, some of my biggest learnings. I also just think this year has given us it's just been a lesson in what's really important, right? For everybody. And so, you know, that's in my personal life, that's in business. I think, you know, the importance of work-life balance and the pride that I take, you know, taking my kids to school every morning now and putting my kids to sleep every night. And I mean every, not some. These are things that, you know, I need to make sure that I find a way to do in some capacity once things are quote unquote back to normal, because you don't get the time back. So, I mean, I think this year has been a huge change for me. I feel like I'm a different person, frankly.
That's fantastic. What a great answer. You're talking about sort of backing off and giving people running room is the most difficult and most important lesson of leadership. One that leaders need to constantly, you know, relearn time after time. Yeah, good for you. You know, one of the issues of the crisis and how it's affected teams, and this is certainly the case for me, is that it's very different for different members of the team. And when there were opportunities for everyone to establish a routine and you kind of knew what was going to happen and everyone was playing by kind of the same 9-to-5 rules, so to speak, it wasn't so pronounced. But now it's a really big deal to have young kids when school is iffy and when you're homeschooling. And it's a really big deal to be living by yourself and when you're stuck in quarantine. These are difficult issues, and it kind of creates a sort of a variety of different challenges in the workforce. How do you approach those?
Yeah, I mean, it is, you know, and I think there's also, there's sort of different constituencies. There's also, I think about people who are, this is their first job. There's people who we've hired in, you know, over the last few months. This is their first work experience and they've never met one of their colleagues. I think if you're very early in your career, this is really hard. This is really hard. I mean, so much of the early years of work are about learning how to have a job, learning how to like be a responsible person and get up in the morning and go somewhere and like function in a certain way. And I think that for everybody, you know, and then there's different challenges for of course for parents, and you know, totally different challenges for single parents, and for people who are taking care of sick people or taking care of their parents, or you know, displaced for a variety. I mean, it is just, I think the thing is to really try to, and you know, it doesn't always work, but to always try to remind yourself that you really don't know what people are going through. You really don't know what's happening in their personal life, and you can't take for granted. And as a result, just like how you behave and how you treat people, like you just need to assume, and I think it's probably something for right now, but I think it's something for all the time, that like, you just can't assume that, you know, everyone's got everything under control, and you just need to be really, really, really human. You know, a long time ago, my dad said something to me, which I think was the first time I ever fired anybody, you know, a long time ago, unfortunately. And he said, you know, when you have the conversation with them, you should treat them like you would want somebody to treat your sister, is what he said to me. And I think everybody can understand sort of what that means. Just a certain, you know, kindness and a certain, you know, whatever. This doesn't have to apply to firing people, though. This can just apply to how you interact with people. And it's not, I'm not trying to say that I'm in any way perfect, or that I am, you know, don't screw up constantly. But I do think that you know, this whole situation is just a reminder for how you treat people and for what's important.
That's great. Let me steer the conversation back to the industry, though, where disruption has been sort of the name of the game for a long time, and you know, Group 9 has been sort of in the middle of it all, and has been kind of, I would say, one of the leading companies sort of at the new direction that media has to take. For example, a lot of the legacy publishing brands have fragmented into a lot of smaller companies. So you can think about the brands that survived the company where I cut my teeth at Time Inc. And now they're owned by a billionaire here, a billionaire there. They're no longer part of a conglomerate. Group 9 has gone the other way, and you actually have a portfolio of wonderful brands. How do you derive strength from that, and how do the brands work together?
Yeah, I think that generally speaking, you know, for brands to be great, they need to have some level of independence. They need to sort of have a, you know, like a soul of their own. And actually, it's actually funny, right at the beginning when you introduced Group 9, you said a site. And I'm sitting here going, no, don't call them websites. They're brands. They're brands. And the reason is that I think that it is, I think that a lot of what happened in media is things did get sort of whittled down to these, everything sort of looking like everything else. And it creates some element of a race to the bottom. And you know, there are a bunch of barriers that have been removed by technology in terms of creating content. And so, you know, I'm a big believer in brand. And you know what I think we've tried to do at Group 9, and what I think, you know, the best holding companies do, is they create a system where where they take a lot of the housekeeping, and in some cases monetization, and in some cases business development, and et cetera, off the sort of immediate plate of the brand, and you get to create centers of excellence and real best practice and some scale in some of those functions, and then you let the brands have their room to run independently. And so I think it's important that brands, you know, share best practices and learn from one another. But broadly speaking, I think that, you know, the best holding companies are going to be ones that are comfortable with their brands not all looking like a cookie cutter version of one another, and having some sort of funkiness and some nuance and a lot of soul. And so, you know, I think that over time, one of the reasons that some of the sort of legacy media companies that were holding companies have unwound has to do with really a bunch of disruption that happened to the traditional business model, that in turn created a need to sort of cut costs that just became debilitating, and eventually started to sort of wear away at the edges of the brands. I'm not speaking specifically about Time Inc. I just mean broadly speaking. I think that when you get into sort of when cost cutting really becomes about cutting content, I think is when media companies start to have trouble. And so the more that you can create companies where when you need to save, generally speaking, and you know, everything changes and situations change, but where content remains sacred, I think is the right general mentality for building great media businesses.
One of the things about thinking about titles as brands is that it gives you permission to serve your readers, your customers, your fans in lots of different ways. And I think about just kind of one example that comes to mind immediately is that the Dodo is starting a pet insurance, or branding a pet insurance company.
I was hoping that's what you were going to say.
Really?
Yeah.
Talk to me about that. Where does being a brand give you permission to go, and where does it not give you permission to go?
Well, so look, it's a great question. I think everyone wants to be Disney, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody wants to own intellectual property that can manifest itself in 700 different ways, all of which are highly valuable and beloved. When I look at, the Dodo, I think the Dodo is a good example of a brand that knows what it is and who it is for. Simply the Dodo has a really big audience of people that love animals, and that, and most people that love animals have pets. And so we have a large audience of pet owners. Mm-hmm. And, I have my Lerer Hippo hat on backwards sometimes, but, all the time when I'm operating at the media company. And when I think about, the opportunities in and around the pet category, I can't help but think that there are so many ancillary categories. Media is one business and one business model, but there are so many amazing business models around pets. And pet insurance is an interesting space and a growing market. And we were lucky to find a company called Pet Plan, which is, we thought had the highest quality and most transparent offering to pet parents, and figured out a way to do a deal with them where we could leverage the brand, the Dodo, which we think stands for a lot and is trusted and beloved, and obviously the audience that we've accumulated and that we speak to at the Dodo to help educate those folks about the pet insurance offering that Pet Plan has. And so in a few months we'll sort of officially bring the Dodo and the Dodo brand and Pet Plan together, and we're really excited about it. And I think it's an example of of the flexibility that great brands have. But these kinds of deals can be really right, and these kinds of deals can feel really convoluted and like you're slapping a logo on a thing that makes no sense. And so, like anything else, it needs to be the right categories, and it needs to be the right opportunities and the right brands. And we're really excited about the Dodo and pet insurance, but each of these needs to be. I think I'm generally of the mind, which is do fewer, more meaningful things, and then sort of spray and pray. But I think that there are lots of opportunities to do meaningful things, extending media brands into new categories.
Okay, good. One of the areas in which the Group 9 brands are successful in brand after brand is mobile video. Is there a secret to making mobile video that's really successful and sort of hard for people not to want to consume?
Well, of course, there's lots of best practices and sort of learnings that we've accumulated over the years. But and I think there are formats and there are topic areas that are generally sort of more shareable or do better in various social platforms. The reality is though that I think people oversimplify how hard it is to build a great brand and build a really great consumer offering. It's not a perfect example, but it's sort of like the Facebook founding story where it's like the Winklevoss brothers are like, yeah, but that was our idea. It's like, yeah, but like he sort of made it. It's not exactly the same thing. And I think that there are lots of people who will look at some of the stuff that, social video brands that are really successful and have large followings and go, oh yeah, but they're just making a bunch of social video. And it's like, yeah, go ahead and try to do that. Like it's not do it well is really difficult, and it takes a bunch of really talented people and a bunch of really smart insights and I think we have really special teams and really special people doing this. And so there's not some like viral trick here. This is like a labor of love and a combination of art and science and people who are the best in the world at creating a certain format of content that is, by the way, a really popular format of content right now. And so I think it's always easy to be sort of dismissive of viral content or social content or any of this stuff. And I'm not suggesting that you were doing that, but I know that there is over time been sort of I think there are people who perceive some of this stuff to be it has no real value to it. Like it's just some sort of throwaway asset, and that is just a super naive way to look at this space, and also shows a real lack of appreciation for the business model that exists here. And so I'm really proud of what we do in mobile and social video, but mobile and social video is it's where people live. That's the first screen for a broad swath of humanity at this point. That's not some ancillary throwaway. The time that we spend on our phones, that's the time that we spend. And so I can't stress enough the importance of that medium and the quality, just because it doesn't fit on a TV screen from an aspect ratio perspective does not mean that it's any less important.
Yeah. Oh, I certainly wasn't implying that.
No, I know, but
our business.
I think it's an important. It's a real point of pride for us.
One of the things, though, that I mean, you remember a couple of years ago that everyone was pivoting to video, and that was now is regarded as one of the, one of the oversimplifications, one of the fallacies, one of the dead ends of how media was going to save itself. And I'm just kind of wondering why it seemed to work for you and not work for some other brands.
I guess, the simple answer is execution. A strategy is only as good as your ability to implement it. And, at certain times it might have come down to, financing situations or capitalization. It comes down to timing. It comes down to people and the talent. It comes down to the quality of the work. And so, it's not I don't think there's a sort of one size fits all answer.
Let's pivot back to discussions of culture. And one of the things that I have admired about Group 9 is its efforts in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And your company began that journey years before the galvanizing events of last spring, and which I compliment you on. Tell me about where you are in that journey, and what got you started.
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is I don't think that we did enough years ago. I think that this is. I think for a long time I sort of believed that having your heart in the right place was enough, and I think if anything, this year has taught us that it's not, and that you have to speak with actions, not just words. And so I know we've always had our heart in the right place, but admittedly, this year we have, I think, done a better job really prioritizing some of our efforts. And I would say the thing that I'm sort of broadly proudest of, and that I think is the best, the easiest way to sort of articulate what we're doing is we have published goals around what we believe the sort of broad demographic makeup of the company should look like. And we have a goal that by 2024 we want at least half of the employees in the company to be people of color. We want 40% of the company to be people of color by 2022. And in order to do that, going forward for any role at any level in the company, at least half the people we meet need to be people of color, and at least half the people we hire need to be people of color. And that is if you present it in terms that are that simple, then that will be what happens. And so for us, we changed some ways that we recruit. And I think, we, like so many other businesses, particularly in the media space, have been highly reliant on referrals from within our employee base. But if your employee base does not have the representation that you want your employee base to eventually have, you're fishing in a pond that is going to continue to sort of self-reinforce, broadly speaking. And so we stopped our internal referral program for the time being, and we've changed up many of the sources that we're using to recruit externally and the organizations that we work with. It's an easy thing to look at and go, okay, but what does this mean? Will it slow you down in hiring? Will it X, Y, and Z? And you can think of 100 excuses for why it could be making a big change to recruiting could slow down recruiting, or you can just decide that it's going to happen and it's that important. And so I'm really fortunate. We have an amazing head of people, an amazing head of D&I, an amazing head of comms, and then great brand leads, all of whom I know have their heart in the right place and are on the right side of issue, the right side of sort of history and all of this stuff. But but again, having your heart in the right place isn't enough, and so we've needed to take action here, and it's something that we've just built now into how we update the company on what's going on, and we'll do that forever. And so when we talk to the company, we talk about our financial performance, we talk about our audience performance, we talk about updates at the brands, we talk about what's going on DE&I, we talk about what's happening in the industry. Great. See you next month for our updates, and we'll touch on the same issues and the same stats. These are, company-wide shared KPIs, and I think that it's and by the way, this is something that this comes back to listening, right? Listening to your team and listening to how people felt, not only in the wake of George Floyd, but just broadly about this issue and how we addressed it. And it was something that, for me, I just, I said, there's doing enough so that this isn't an issue, or there's deciding to try to be a leader in it. And we're deciding to try to be a leader in it. And it doesn't mean we're not gonna, like anything else, make mistakes, but broadly speaking, we just made a definitive decision that this is something that we're not going to be we're not going to be sort of defensive on. We're going to be offensive on.
Well, that's great. And setting those goals and holding yourself accountable to it up and down the company is, it just seems like an incredibly decisive move. So congratulations on that. Let me ask you a question that I ask everyone on this show, a couple of them actually. Looking back on your career, who had the biggest influence on you? Who's
my dad? Mentor,
inspiration? Your dad?
By
Tell
far.
me more.
Well, I think I've already talked about him quite a bit. He's my partner in my venture fund. One of my two partners. My other partner is Eric. He's he was the one who I think through osmosis became interested in the media business and in entrepreneurship through. He's somebody who I've had on my board for several years. I put him on my board because I valued his sort of insights and perspectives. And I think it's unique in that he both actually understands the businesses that I'm in, having worked in them and knowing them, and he also obviously always has my best interest in mind. And so he's able to help me sort of rationalize between personal decisions and business decisions, and sort of ultimately land on happiness for me as his goal versus advice that you might get from other kinds of advisors. So he without question, he's been the most influential business person. I obviously have other people who I have gotten a huge amount from over the years, but I think I have a unique situation in sort of the nature of my relationship with him.
That's great. That's great. Now, the statistics are that most entrepreneurs don't succeed. And this may be an early question for you to reflect back on your career so far, but let me ask it anyways. This is entrepreneurship is a kind of low percentage game, actually, and that all those college students when you were graduating from college, those college graduates who decided to go to Wall Street were actually playing the percentages right, you would say. So given the stats in entrepreneurship, why were you one of the ones who succeeded?
Well, so I don't think any entrepreneur thinks that it is a low percentage game. Nobody starting a company thinks that they're not going to succeed. First of all, so I think that is. I feel very confident in that statement. As far as why, so far, I've been somewhat successful, I guess, as a product of, like anything else, it's a lot of luck, it's some hard work, and it's a bunch of timing, and hopefully it's, some intelligence or capability. And really for me, I mean, if you really go back and track why anybody is successful, normally they're successful because of the people that they work with. And so, we're succeeding at Group 9 because of the team. We're succeeding at the fund because of the team and our entrepreneurs. I mean, at the end of the day, I feel like, my success is really, and a sort of, it is directly linked to the people who I get to work with. So, that's the answer for everybody.
Yeah. Directly linked to that, that pattern recognition or gut feeling we had about, we mentioned before about the people you're going to invest in, the people you're going to decide to work with.
Totally.
Good. Ben, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. It's been really great. Good luck to you and Group 9 Media and your fund and all the things you've got cooking.
Looking forward to seeing you in person next time.
Yes, me too.
Okay.
And to the audience, thank you all for watching. This is The Human Factor, the LinkedIn Live of Inc. and Fast Company, and I'm Eric Schurenberg. Thanks for watching.